This is your opportunity to ask whatever embarrassing questions you want of our local agencies or our county supervisor, Don Wagner. So, first question. So back here.
I don't need no microphone. Sheriff, could you give an update on the relationship of the department regarding the federal agencies and state law regarding immigration?
So, is this on? So the question was the relationship between myself, our organization, and federal partners.
Right.
There's the law that was recently passed, SB 54, known as sanctuary stay, and there's been an erosion of an attempt to prevent, quite honestly, sheriff's offices. If you look at these bills, they're mostly aimed at preventing sheriff's offices from cooperating with our federal partners. SB 54 did exactly that. It was a third iteration of that attempt. And as the sheriff, I have to follow state law. But there's also ways that I can legally still comply around that law. If you remember back a few years ago when SB 54 came out and said you can no longer communicate with ICE on operations and predominantly to protect, quite honestly, criminals within our jail system by being held accountable and returned to the custody of ICE. And that's what SB 54 ultimately resulted in. But what it didn't preclude was me and Sheriff Hutchins at the time from posting the release dates of everybody within our custody when they're getting out, which is what we did. And believe it or not, the Attorney General said that he was going to come down and arrest us for violating SB 54. And it was actually Governor Brown that came to our side and said that's actually legally permissible. That language was within the statute intentionally to allow sheriffs to do exactly what they're doing. So now we post on our website, everybody, their release dates and when they're getting out of custody. So now if ICE looks at that or not, that's up to ICE. I cannot tell them go look at the website, but if they look at it, I'm going to pick on my good friend Don Wagner, and Don Wagner is getting out tomorrow at 8 a.m., and they want to pick Don Wagner up tomorrow at 8 a.m., and I don't communicate that to them, they can do that.
You went there. I can't believe you went there.
Well, let's give him till Thursday. Let's let him be on his race. But here's the thing, and this is the tricky part. I don't play into the national narrative and rhetoric of immigration. I am precluded by law from enforcing immigration law. And I have no interest in enforcing immigration law. I have an interest in protecting this community. And in protecting this community and other communities in Orange County means protecting everybody within Orange County, including immigrant communities, because we need them to be participatory in keeping their community safe. We need to report the gang members and the drug dealers and everybody else so they can tell us who the bad actors are. And you may or may not agree with that, but I have taken an oath to protect everybody. So the narrative, I still fully cooperate with ICE as much as I can within the law. If you saw a press release I put out recently that caused me a lot of headaches with certain members of the media, I'm probably the only sheriff in California tracking those who I can't turn over to ICE who are coming back to my jail. And so this last year, we had about 1,500 inmates in my care and custody who ICE wanted. They placed detainers against them. I couldn't turn them all over because of SB 54. And those who I couldn't turn over, the 1,015 who I had to release out my back door, 238 came back to me with new violations of law. Child molestation, rape, violent crimes, all a litany of crimes that they came back with. Those are the ones that I'm concerned about. That's what I've been advocating for. And some people will say, well, that's a recidivism issue. It's not a recidivism issue. These are 238 crimes that never should have occurred if I could have cooperated with ICE and turned them over. And they don't want everybody. They want the bad actors. I want to be able to turn them over back to them. And guess who wants them least? Guess what community members want them least? The immigrant communities don't want them back either, because it's painting them with a very broad brush. Outside of immigration, they don't want them there because they're coming back oftentimes preying upon the immigrant communities in which they were originally arrested from. So I will push the limit. I will do everything I legally can. I've argued against SB 54. The only thing SB 54 accomplished was advocating for criminals to be returned to our community. That's it. It did nothing else. When I was in Sacramento in 2017, I believe, when this was being proposed, this legislation, the author, Kevin De Leon, said, we're going to write a law that prevents sheriffs from enforcing immigration law. And I said, where do I sign? Because we don't do that, we've never done that, and I have no interest in doing that. I don't go out and try to collect people who haven't paid their income taxes. That's not my responsibility either. My responsibility is to keep the community safe in every way that I can. And they went way beyond that language and changed it significantly. So in long answer to your question, I will, in every way I can, fully cooperate with the confines of the law, and I'm advocating to get the law changed because it is making our communities less safe. And I will do everything I can to make that happen.
Do we have another question? It's important to use the roaming mics because we have the session being videotaped, and the audio will come much clearer if we use the microphone.
I want to address the sheriff and the supervisor. I have some pictures here of the parking on my street due to the fact that these rehab homes, or let me rephrase that, group homes. It's definitely changing the character of my neighborhood. On those pictures, you'll see there's no on-street parking. They've started parking in my cul-de-sac, which is private. I've lived out here for 40 years. I says, well, I came home from Dallas this one day. There's a guy parked in my drive, and he's unloading his stuff on my neighbor's yard. And I says, what are you doing? He says, well, I'm going down to play for the veterans. I'm going, well, you can't park here. Well, we got into a verbal altercation. I drove my truck into my driveway, and he followed me into my driveway. I says, hey, I'm done talking to you. I'll go down and talk to the manager. So I think there's more we can do about this situation. And one of the things that I'm really going to home in on is an environmental impact report. These people just can't come in our neighborhood and change the character of our neighborhood because they can. I'm not buying that. And I hope that we can do something through the legislation. I've been on the internet. There's been like 10 or 12 bills since, I believe, don't quote me on the dates, but 2007 to current, and they've all been shelved. Nobody wants to tackle the problem. Well, I think Don has done a good job for us in that regard. And the parking is that. And what about permits? Do these people just come in and they don't have to have a permit? You don't know who these people are. I've noticed that there's felons.
So we have to keep the questions kind of short.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm here to explain what's going on here, because there's a lot of people here that are concerned about this. Right.
So let me tell you why those bills have all been shelved. And the sheriff has talked a little bit about the problem. And it's even broader than he's talked about. He mentioned Proposition 47 and Proposition 57, making it much more difficult for the sheriffs to do their job, making it much easier for people to just get hooked up in a jail, out the next day, 1 o'clock, 8 in the morning, whenever, and back out into the neighborhoods preying on folks again, because it is a proverbial slap on the wrist. That's the impact of 47 and 57. In part, it's also the impact of what the state has done under Governor Brown with what is called AB 109. The idea with AB 109 was that our state prisons were overcrowded. We had a 3-judge federal panel that was in charge of our prisons because of lawsuits, were overseeing our prisons. They were too crowded, and the governor and the legislature, in their wisdom and over my no vote, said, here's what we're going to do. We're going to release some of those prisoners back to the local counties. The counties are going to house them. Well, that immediately impacts the counties, and the counties end up having to release some of the less violent folks, the ones much more likely to abuse drugs, abuse alcohol, come into your neighborhoods, break into your cars, do that sort of mischief. And it was from the state on down for years to try to deal with the prison overcrowding. What's that got to do with the sober living homes? The folks up in Sacramento look at them as a safety valve. They won't house these prisoners in state prisons. The county's impacted, trying to take the overflow from the state and is releasing some of these folks into the sober living homes, the idea being the sober living homes will provide the safety valve. What we are seeing in the communities is, in many cases, they aren't. They aren't actually making sure folks get sober. They aren't making sure folks stay off of drugs. They aren't being the kinds of good neighbors and changing the characteristic of the neighborhood that we see in these photos. And that's what the county, to the extent it could, and it's limited, tried to step in and put a stop to. But we are facing pushback from the state that likes these as a relief valve. We face pushback from the federal government because if you are in a drug or rehab facility, if you have a drug or alcohol problem, by federal law, you're disabled. You fall under the Americans with Disabilities Act. Well, we know how that gets abused. That is some of the limitation to us pushing back on the feds. The state then controls, again by law, houses with 6 or more residents. The county can't control them. The individual cities can't control them. The state has usurped the right. And you go on the website and you can complain, and maybe the state will respond, but it's out of the hands of the locals. Why? To protect them. To protect the shell game from AB 109 moving these prisoners to different levels. And so that's why the bills all get shelved. I was up there when AB 109 happened. I've been watching this for years, and the sheriff's office and the county are doing our level best to make a bad situation as good as possible because the deck is stacked against us. A couple of the things we can do, we've now put into the ordinance, keeping them 1,000 feet apart, making sure that they are enforcing the drug, as I said in my remarks earlier, the drug and the alcohol getting sober type programs. But it is a moving target, and it is one that is protected at the state level, not your rights and your interests being protected up there.
Next question right up front here. Hold it closer.
Is there any effort among people on the state chair in different departments to solve any of these problems with artificial intelligence and algorithm? Are you gathering algorithms to push it into artificial
Tom, I'm having trouble
intelligence?
hearing you.
Yeah, I think if I could summarize it, I believe the question you asked was, is there any efforts to solve some of these problems through artificial intelligence
Yes.
and other means?
Well, gathering the information by the algorithms.
So yes, there is, not just this issue, but others. And what the Supervisor Wagner described is very difficult. And I'm going to give you a recommendation on legislation that's coming forth for your vote, one issue coming up. So yes, it's very difficult. We do know there is a problem with these enterprises. The challenge, I was just in Washington, D.C. for a week, and I walked the Capitol and met with federal partners, including DHS, on some of these issues that were brought up previously. And when you go to D.C., you're usually going there for funding, making sure funding comes back to locals for some of the programs we have. And you talk about some of the overarching impacts of some of the legislation or some of the laws that protect people and how they're impacting us specifically in California. We talk about the impacts that Supervisor Wagner brought up and some of the legislation that's been shelved. To talk about the impacts of ADA protections and how it's impacting Southern California on a national level, that falls silent on 49 other states because they're looking at policy changes on ADA compliance or protections that we're realizing the negative outcomes in California that's not impacting Missouri or New York or these other places, because these sober living homes, these people are being imported to us. They're coming from all over the nation on the premise of getting sober on now this is not everybody, so I'm going to be cautious when I say this enterprise that operates in the sober living home business, they are criminal enterprises. They are professional criminal enterprises who take advantage of people's addiction. They traffic them here. They oftentimes get them reintroduced to narcotics to get them a dirty test, to get them into a program which there's no benefit for them to be successful, because if they're successful, guess what they don't have? They don't have a future client. And they cycle them through these sober living homes repeatedly, and oftentimes including young women who get sexually abused during that. So I have a strategy, and part of my strategy, unfortunately, includes for you an investigative plan that unfortunately I can't share with you, because that's not how good investigative plans work, by telling you how we're going to do it. But I am working with some people to see if we can incorporate a strategy in doing that. Your second part was about artificial intelligence. I have numerous organizations that I'm part of, and I sit on a law enforcement JPA on technology projects in Orange County. I'm co-chair of the statewide data sharing task force. I'm chair of the California State Sheriff's Association Technology Committee, and chair of our Fusion Center committee as well for the state. And artificial intelligence, when you hear that, it sounds really, really neat, but it's really a buzzword for things like facial recognition and other technologies that are coming forth. And like many technologies that seem scary to some in Sacramento, there's this abolish that technology because it's not perfect. And I want to create statewide policy, even a national framework for policy that controls this technology appropriately so it has a good, legitimate law enforcement use. So I'm going to give you an example when it comes to facial recognition technology. A lot of people are thinking this is the panacea to solve every type of problem when it comes to identification. When you look at facial recognition is investigative in nature. It's an investigative lead. It's a pointer system. And I want to be able to use that appropriately within the confines of the law. Rather than having it abolished, use it to where we can help solve crime. Where it gets tricky for government, either in the state or in the national framework, is people think that when we have a facial recognition match, that's evidentiary in value, that you take it, you get an arrest warrant, and you can start kicking in doors to people's homes. It isn't at that level yet. DNA is, through our crime lab, that's just nationally and internationally accredited. If you get a DNA hit, we can write a search warrant, things on that, because it's at a very high level, very high threshold of evidentiary value. That's what concerns me, is people who will abuse that technology inappropriately and then end up getting it completely abolished. I have 2 million image quality photos in my jail database that I'm moving towards in a regional crime center construct, where we take crime throughout all of Orange County, all of our 22 other law enforcement agencies and the Sheriff's Department. We start centralizing crime analysis into one location. So if you have a photograph of somebody off of somebody's ring, right, off their either camera, we can take that photo, put it in our database, see if somebody's been through our jail before, or even broader than that, other jails in the contiguous area. And if we get a match, it's an investigative lead. I'm going to pick on my good friend Don here again. Right? Don's
Not a jail, no.
Yeah, but if we get a match on Don, and then we can go and at least follow up on that, and then do other investigative techniques to confirm, validate that information, that he is in fact the suspect, and then use that validated information to write a search warrant or arrest warrant and do it that way. So that's what we're trying to do within the state. If we prove the construct of this crime center for Orange County and take all of our disparate crime databases and investigative leads and centralize them in one location, we'll have a crime center serving 3.2 million residents in Orange County, tying all these leads together into one location, start solving crime in a way that's not done anywhere else nationally. We'll be the largest, most robust crime center in the nation we have a stopgap on crime, which is where we need to go. We can't look at things in a city. You can't look at even in contiguous borders. You have to tie all these things together in a way that gives us a very robust system. And that JPA I talked about that I chair, we recently negotiated enterprise licenses for analytical software We looked at that as an enterprise for all of law enforcement in Orange County have access to the same data. By the way, saving you almost $1 million as taxpayers. Because the software companies don't like us. They don't like us negotiating on a large economy of scale. The company I did that with, LexisNexis, if you know that name, they realized the benefit. Now they're talking to LA County, Riverside County, San Bernardino County, and San Diego County to get them on the same system. We'll have the entire Southern California region all sharing information, county to county, across borders. And why that's important to you is residential burglary crews oftentimes don't live in this county. They come from Moreno Valley and Los Angeles. So they come in, that's your neighborhood, they hit 5 or 6 or 7 houses and they go to somewhere else. So tying all these loose ends together is how we're going to solve crime on a much larger scale to keep our crime rates low, which is the catch-all and all that. Way too long an answer for you. Sorry I took so long, but we have a strategy, and it's all about connecting the dots.
Let me take a second for a little bit broader look at AI, because it is a fascinating issue. Little personal anecdote. My daughter is an actual rocket scientist. Honors graduate, Georgia Tech, aeronautical engineering. She takes after her mother. And is now doing computer science. And I've had a couple of conversations with her about artificial intelligence. She'll tell you she's worried about it. And I say, but wait a minute. Alexa has no sense of humor and does not understand my sarcasm. And she says, not yet. Which brings me to the point and an issue that we in public service grapple with. On the board, for example, have to grapple with. Right now, there are 66 companies in the state of California, over 80 nationally, that are licensed and permitted to test self-driving autonomous vehicles, the next frontier of artificial intelligence. Why does that matter here? Well, because look, those smart cars are coming. I don't know if they're 10 years off or if they're 5 years off or when they're coming. They're coming. What does it mean? It means when they get here and when they're all connected, it's possible to get out on the 55 at 5 o'clock going from Costa Mesa to Yorba Linda and do 60 miles an hour bumper to bumper. I've quadrupled, I've quintupled the capacity without laying another inch of asphalt. There is a proposal in front of the Orange County Transportation Authority Board on which I serve to spend $100 million a mile over that roughly 5-mile stretch between the 405 and the 5 to increase capacity so that you'll go on average, instead of 23 miles an hour during peak, 26 miles an hour. Do I want to spend $100 million a mile of your tax dollars for a proposal that may, in 5 or 10 years or whenever it gets here, make that unnecessary? That's something that we grapple with. That's something I would invite your input on. And even more broadly than that, in order to get your input, I had a meeting a couple of months ago, to be honest now, a couple of months ago. Computer scientists at UCI, the Orange County, many members of the Orange County business community, the high-tech leaders in the business community, and the United Nations. They will be coming here, I believe in September, maybe it's October of this year, with a major AI conference. They normally do it in Switzerland, I believe, an international conference. AI is coming. We need to get out in front of it. We need to make sure we understand it. We need to make sure it's done right. But Tom, you are absolutely right. It has the potential to solve very many problems, but we need to make sure we control it, not that it controls us, and that is something we are grappling with. And just as I say, for example, in transportation, that's one of the issues that we're facing.
Rick. So I have a question for East Orange County Water District, Lisa Olin. So about 2/3 of our people in North Tustin get about 75% of their water from wells. And I've heard that the federal EPA has concerns about a new contaminant in wells Is that something we should be concerned about?
So first, may I say I just love your community and thank you so much for allowing us to come back here every year. You really are an example of America, you know, that I grew up in. So I applaud you for coming out, not to protest, but to be proactively involved in your community. Rick mentioned forever chemicals. That's what we're talking about, PFAS. And you're going to hear a lot about it. It's kind of like coronavirus. There's a lot of fear and concern about it. We really don't know what the effects are, but it is in our groundwater basin and our district, East Orange County Water District, because we feel that we have a contract with you, and that contract is you trust us to bring you clean, safe water. We proactively shut our wells down, and we are buying imported water that we know doesn't contain PFAS. What does this mean to you on a practical level? It's going to mean a higher water cost to you, frankly. We're going to put in treatment, and that treatment is going to be probably maybe 2/3 to 100% more than the cost we pay right now for water. I know that's not what you want to hear. What I can tell you that you may want to hear is just as you take care of your homes, we take care of that infrastructure on the water system. We take the money you give us and we put it into those systems. So those are in very good condition. Your sewer system is in very good condition. You may hear about other areas in America where it's falling apart. That is not what's happening here in your area. But we're challenged. We have a shortage of water and we have an increasing population. And you don't have to have a degree in economics to know that that means scarcer supply, higher costs. So as the years go on, you're going to be asked to be more efficient with it. I know that you already are very efficient. You're people that don't waste things. But we're going to end up not having green lawns probably. And we're going to have beautiful drought-tolerant landscaping. And we're all going to learn to love that, just like we love our lawns. And we're going to leave something for our children that's better than what we got. So sorry, long-winded talk there.
So Doug Dabbert, chairman of the East Orange County Water District, is over here and he'd like to make a comment.
Yeah, but my comment is not about water. I actually have a question for Supervisor Wagner on a more local level. Supervisor, where Tustin, North Tustin, and the city of Santa Ana converge on the west side off Santa Clara, over the last 2 or 3 years developed a huge on-street parking problem. As those apartments have become overcrowded, the city of Santa Ana has arrogantly red curbed all of its streets, made it permanent parking only in their neighborhoods, pushing the traffic problem up over the 55 freeway into North Tustin and Tustin. Ethelby, Fairmont, Santa Clara are a disaster. Any comment?
You're right, that's exactly what they've done, and it's not going to stand. We are, in fact, and I've had meetings with Rick and FCA on precisely this issue. We are working actively with both Tustin, which the City Council in Tustin, which Director Dabbert served on, and is one of the cities in my district, and of course, on behalf of North Tustin, my office, and with the supervisor, First District Supervisor for Santa Ana, to figure out ways to, in fact, address the problem. And one of the things that has been talked about, and we haven't done it yet, but it will involve hearing from the communities. With the community, what do you want? Do you want red curbs? Do you want a permit system? Do you want what? And how far does it extend off of one direction from 55? Those are questions that are just now coming to the fore. The issue came to me a couple of weeks ago. It is being actively looked at. I don't have a solution for you yet. I haven't heard entirely from the community yet, but I am going to tell you we are hearing that it's out there and are not going to put up with it on behalf of the residents of Tustin, the residents of North Tustin.
Thank you. Is there another question? I'm sorry, right here. You have the microphone? He's bringing you a microphone because we want to make sure that the video recording can hear the question.
Well, first question is to our supervisor. If in fact we're having a water shortage, why are we issuing more building permits? Shouldn't we, put those aside and not allow any more building permits?
Short answer to that question is I am not a fan of shutting down all development at all. I have always believed that a community that does not continually improve itself is one that ends up withering and dying. And so I am not supportive of a blanket prohibition on building permits. I am, however, quite supportive of those permits being issued wisely, appropriately to folks who will, in fact, be able to provide for themselves the communities that they're trying to improve, who will be good stewards of the water, who will work with Director Dabbert and the East Orange Water District, et cetera. But a blanket prohibition on building permits is, to use the water analogy, throwing the baby out with the bathwater. It can be done smartly rather than just say, forget it, we're rolling up the streets, we've got ours, and we're shutting down.
I have one more question. Recently, we've been invaded in our area, North Tustin, with the coyotes. I called the sheriff's department, and they referred me to the animal control, who referred me to the Fish and Game, who told me that I can't do anything about it. What can we do? Here we are in North Tustin. The house next to me is vacant because of the water department. And then we have a bunch of coyotes in the area. Our neighbor has lost her dog because of the coyotes. And the neighbor across the street have young children, 6, 7 years old. And I'm really concerned. What can we do? I mean, I've called every agency I know of, and nobody can say anything. All they say is they refer me to somebody else. All I'm getting is a county shuffle.
That sounds like another one for me. Unacceptable. That's the first I've heard about a county shuffle. Or the animal control is the place to go. Animal control is the organization that is supposed to be looking into this. And if they are not, they're hearing from me tomorrow. Oh, here comes the microphone.
Yeah, and all due respect, sir, I called the animal control. They referred me to Fish and Game, who Fish and Game told me there's nothing I can do about it.
I
So
heard
that's
you.
where I'm at.
And that's why that county shuffle is not acceptable to me. So
Well,
that's the first I've heard about it, and I will be with animal control tomorrow.
As a citizen, that's what we're getting. We're getting the county shuffle.
This is the
Understood.
first I've heard about it also. I'm consistent with Supervisor Wagner. I will tell you that before this week is over, we will have a meeting with Animal Control and Fish and Game, and we'll come up with a strategy.
Yeah, thank you for bringing it up. I think it's going to get some attention. So we have another question right here.
Yes, my question is for Mr. Cataldi, and you may want to turn it over to the supervisor, but recently I'm very appreciative, and I'm sure most of our Cowan Heights folks are appreciative of the new remedial program going on in our streets. However, the first I heard of it was when I saw those illuminated signs saying, for the next 3 months, you're going to have some delays. Can you tell us a little bit about how that program came about, what some of the criteria might be, and who's funding it, et cetera? It was welcome news, but has a few rough edges.
I'm Richard Vuong, sitting in for Colby Cataldi. I actually cover development services. I could get that question over to Public Works, our director, and get an answer for you. But I only cover development services.
Yeah, that's a question that a number of people called FCA about what's happening on Skyline. Bruce Jr. Use the microphone, Bruce.
2 words, Veterans Cemetery. Thank you.
Oh, wow. Veterans Cemetery, what's that? You're not ready for it. They're going to drag you kicking and screaming, and you're going to be a lot older before you go. I understand that. Veterans Cemetery, real briefly, the city of Irvine has been screwing around with it for years. It's a political football there. I am not in the least bit optimistic that we are ever going to get a Veterans Cemetery in Irvine, at least on the in Irvine, on the old El Toro footprint. I have been advocating for a new project that is not actually new. It was something the Board of Supervisors, before I got on the board, proposed, and I think it's a great idea. There is a site. It is gorgeous. It is hilly. You can imagine it looking a lot like Arlington, out on the 241 and the 91 off Gibson Canyon. That site, 288 gorgeous acres, has been donated by the county to the Orange County Cemetery District with a deed restriction. It must be a veterans cemetery. And there is more than enough acreage there. I myself have met with the head of the Federal Veterans Administration Cemetery Division and asked the question, how much do you need for the veterans in Orange County? The answer is, to bury the expected need in Orange County for 100 years, we need a 55-acre site. 55. Over 100 has been donated. The entire site is 288. It works. It more than fills the need of the veterans. And then there's the issue of El Toro. Let me suggest this solution. I despair of being able to bring our veterans to the hallowed ground of El Toro. It's too much of a political football, and we don't have time to go into why and who the bad guy is. How about this? We're going to be ripping up the runways. They're going to get recycled. That's what you do with the concrete and asphalt as it's ripped up. It gets recycled into building materials. Let's dedicate those building materials to the site in Anaheim Hills. We'll bring El Toro to the veterans out in Anaheim. The site is gorgeous. The renderings have been done. Contact my office if you want a tour. I've run 3 of them out there already. That's the solution to getting the veterans the cemetery they need and getting it sooner rather than letting the city of Irvine mess around with it any longer.
So I have a question for OC Parks, Scott Thomas. When do you think you will break ground on the new park, Newport Avenue and Crawford Canyon?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Rick. Well, we had 2 really good community meetings on that park. It's a neighborhood park, a 2.5 acre park if you're not familiar with it. We have an exhibit in the back if you'd like to see it. We have a really good design for it, and we've got some money from a developer that's obligated to pay $850,000 for in lieu park fee money towards it. So we've got some money there. So we have the park plan, and we're doing final design right now, and we're about to do our CEQA documentation on the site. So that should take about 9 months or so. So I have from the project manager, early 2021 is when we're thinking of going out to bid, and then hopefully we'll get good bids and then construct the park. So supervisor can cut the ribbon. We're looking at mid 2021 for that. Groundbreaking and then cutting the ribbon in late 2022.
Thank you.
The question was how many parking spots we have. We have about 11 parking spots. We heard from the neighbors that some don't want parking, some do. It's sort of a compromise. We feel that people that have elderly, they want to attend the park, could use those parking spaces as well as moms or dads with small children. And then we have accessible spaces, so required by the ADA, we have to provide that. So that's typically neighborhood parks do not have parking, but given the circumstances, the location of this park, and the neighborhood feedback, we thought that this was a good kind of compromise to provide some parking.
Yeah, I think that people who come some distance are going to require parking. There's a question back here.
Supervisor Wagner, in your comments about RVs, you said something to the effect that in the name of property rights, people should be able to park their RVs on their properties if screened. My question to you is, does that mean that you're in favor of homeowners being able to park RVs on their front driveway? And if they have, say, an RV and a boat, can they park both the RV and the boat on the driveway? And if you're against that, what steps will you take to make sure that doesn't happen?
Well, the current, what I would do is enforce the current code as it is written. And you and I have had that conversation, Roger, and we agree on the way the code ought to be enforced. We agree on what the code actually says. It is not the way it is currently being enforced. I support the actual language of the code. And I do not support, despite what I think you've written to me on a couple of occasions, things like allowing, as I say, Airbnbs. I do not support renting out your driveway, allowing somebody else to park an RV there. I don't approve of multiple RVs and park for long periods of time in front of houses on residential streets, et cetera.
So the FCA position is we think RVs should be beyond the setback and screened. And if that's what you mean, we're delighted.
And screen.
Yes. Is there another question? No, okay. Someone bring her a microphone.
She's got one right, Rick, she has it right here.
What is the definition?
Oh, so you're next. Let's take this question back here.
Hi, I need some clarification on an article that was in the Foothill Sentry in January. There was an article that states that you can have 2 ADUs on your property. One, I assume, is a percentage of your parcel, and then a junior ADU at 450 square feet. And you can also convert your garage into an ADU, and you don't need to replace the garage. Right now in our neighborhood, we have someone who has built a huge house behind a house, and all of it has passed an inspection, and he intends on renting out the first house, the guest house, and converting the garage into an ADU. So my concerns are safety, and we talk about we're in a water crisis, and how it's gonna impact our neighborhood as far as parking, and then just who's living in these places. So that is my question, if I get some clarification on this article that was in the Foothill Sentry. Thank you.
So recently, state law has approved new ADU rules. So in all of California, a single-family dwelling can have one ADU and also have another junior accessory dwelling unit. Parking rules have changed too. So if you convert a garage, you don't have to replace your parking. We are bound by these state rules though, so we can't go against what the state law says we have to. But we do enforce building codes. So if there are safety issues, we are inspecting them. They do require permits. So for those safety issues, we are enforcing that aspect of it.
Yeah, welcome to my life. As I mentioned, I served up in Sacramento, and you vote no, and they do what they're going to do anyway. This is one of the things that is state law mandates us to permit these, and you're not to pass the buck because your assemblyman and your state senator are not supportive of this, but it's Gavin Newsom and those folks who are just saying, you locals don't know, we know better up in Sacramento. So if you have health and safety issues, those things we can enforce, but generally the permitting rules, hands of the locals unfortunately are tied by state law that is encouraging this sort of stuff because of course Sacramento, they know better than you and I do.
So there was a lady here in front who had a question, and we didn't have a microphone.
Supervisor Wagner, back to the motor homes parked on the driveway. You alluded to the fact that they had to have some screening by code. Was that correct?
It's my understanding that there is a requirement under the code that they be screened. And that is not being enforced, and it should be.
It is not at all.
Correct.
Yeah.
Understand that. And I've said from day one with Roger, that Roger and I agree on what the code actually says, and that's what ought to be enforced. It isn't being enforced currently.
What do you think screening means from the other lady in
Well,
the back as well as myself?
Screening is defined in the code, and I, off the top of my
Oh, it
head,
is in
I
the
don't-
code.
I
It
be-
is defined.
I believe so.
I think the code says you have to have a 6-foot screen in front of the RV.
Or on a side behind the house.
But how about
It's
in the
code.
driveway? If you're parked in the driveway, many of them are parked. in the
If they are
driveway.
in violation of the code, there ought be enforcement. I have never varied from that. I continue to believe that.
And who do we complain to?
You complain,
To him? I like him.
and they'll and they will direct you to the. It's really code enforcement, building code enforcement.
I know it.
I'm trying to make it a joke.
But who does, do they have code enforcement officers? Or
They do.
They
Oh
do.
yeah. Oh yeah. The county absolutely does.
And what is their title? Or are they a policeman? Are they a?
They're
don't wanna-
they're not sworn law.
I don't want to point to the guy sitting in the back of the room.
But that's the one I'm gonna go to?
But there's two aspects of this, and this is where it gets somewhat tricky. There's California law, vehicle code law, and other things that happen on a public roadway. And then there's ordinances that are codified that are beyond law enforcement, that are code enforcement issues. And code enforcement issues are oftentimes dealt with through an administrative citation to correct. And the one, I will tell you, there's a benefit to having county unincorporated area like you have. There's also a disadvantage that you don't have a municipal city council that can deploy resources on a local front. So if you were in pick any city that's a municipal city and you have a code enforcement issue, there is a body, usually through Public Works or some other avenue, that deals with the code enforcement violations with a hearing and a way to get those things enforced. Unfortunately, in unincorporated, it's not that established to have this body that deals with code enforcement issues. Doesn't mean they can't be dealt with, but there's two separate things. There's violations of law, and there's violations of administrative code, rules of conduct for a neighborhood, for example, like the screening issue or parking that might be a violation of the code, right? The code enforcement, but not the actual statute that would make it a criminal law violation. I know that's maybe a complicated difference between the two, but we still have ways that we can address those issues. So if there's code enforcement issues, absolutely, if there's a way that we can address that, please let us know. And there is a number you can call that's a non-emergency number for these issues to be addressed, and we will do our best to help mitigate those issues.
So I think we should work with Supervisor Wagner to make sure in the future these codes are enforced. Right now, they're not being enforced. So we have another question? Sit back here.
Rick?
My question is for the fire authority. I recently went to a refresher course on CPR, and I learned about this very cool smartphone app called Pulse Point. Do you know about this?
Yes.
Would you like to make a commercial message? If you don't, I will, but I'd rather hear it from you.
We don't own Pulse Point. As a department, we subscribe to it. And what Pulse Point is it's a notification system that it's a free app on your phone, and you can put in the area that you wish to monitor, and you can also put in what you want to monitor: house fires, accidents, etc. Pulse Point isn't going to give you the exact address of where the emergency is, but it lets you know that there is an emergency in the area, and it's something that you want to know about. It is something that is triggered by our dispatch center when our calls first get loaded into the computer via the 911 caller.
He's bringing you a microphone. We can't hear you.
The reason I signed up is that if you choose this option, when you're in a public place and there is an emergency, like a heart problem, you can receive a notification and you can assist as a bystander until the professional EMTs arrive. And one of the examples they gave us was a call they made recently at the Irvine Spectrum. So once they get to the curb, they're still 5 minutes away from the victim. And so if you're in a public place, you could be called upon if you choose that on your app. It won't work if your next door neighbor is having a heart attack, because it's not a public place. But it seemed to me a very cool thing to do. I'd encourage everybody to get the app, Pulse Point.
Rick, another question?
Real quick, let me take this opportunity. I've got Pulse Point on my phone. I urge you, download it. Keeps you informed in the event of emergencies. You've got a little bit more of an update and a heads up. And on that subject, I also want to make sure everybody knows about Alert OC. alertoc.com or alertoc.gov. I believe both of them work. .org. All right. alertoc.org. And that will give you information as well on any public safety threats, fires. It just is a great opportunity to get a little bit more in touch, a little bit more quickly with the public threats that maybe are here in Orange County. So Alert OC, the folks in the sheriff's office do a great job updating that, keeping us all informed. So that impulse point.
So before we take the last question, I want to take an opportunity to make sure people know how to contact FCA if you have an issue. We have some door hangers at the check-in desk and the desk out front. If you want to distribute these to your neighbors, tell them how to get a hold of FCA and what it is we do. If you want a box full of them to distribute over a large area, we'd be happy to get them to you. Just let us know. So the last question here is the lady back here.
So you mentioned we have a really beautiful community, which we do, and you'd like to have more beautification, which would be great. But I think another problem besides beautification is identification. And I really believe it may be time finally after all these years for us to have a name. Is it Cowan Heights, Lemon Heights, Foothill Community, North Tustin, Santa Ana? You know, we don't know how to identify ourselves. So is there a way to have a committee, number one, to identify, maybe have signage, monuments, even our own zip code again, which would really be great, so that we're not considered Santa Ana 92705, but something of what we really are.
Let me pick up. I'm going to let the community decide if that's the right thing to do or not. Tell me what you think. But I do want to use that as a jumping off point for one small thing, and I'm sure some of you are seeing this. You are being taxed too high. You are being taxed at Santa Ana rates. You are being taxed because the people of Santa Ana voted and you did not for a tax. Now, we fought a whole revolution about that 250 plus years ago, taxation without representation. We are working to get it fixed, but the fix most likely is at the federal level, getting a new zip code, getting a separate zip code back. Contact Katie Porter's office, demand that that happens, because that has to happen at the federal level. I will tell you this though, if you're doing a big ticket purchase, the car is the most obvious one, and you're being charged the wrong sales tax, take it up with the vendor. They should know to fix it. If they don't, you can go on, and I'm sorry that this is falling on the individual taxpayer, but you can go on to the state franchise tax board's website and you can get it reversed and a refund. So until we can get the federal government to fix the problem, and maybe a new name helps, certainly a new zip code will help. Take your own power back to make sure you're taxed at the right rate. And while I'm on the subject of taxes, one more thing, tomorrow's election, Measure A, I wrote Measure A. It makes it tougher for the Board of Supervisors to raise taxes. I encourage everybody to vote for it.
I think Sheriff Barnes has a comment on this.
I just have one comment on a different issue. And the one thing that I can do as the elected officials, I can actually get behind and support initiatives. There will be an initiative hopefully coming up on your ballot in November called Keeping California Safe Act. Now, I've told you before that it's hard to tell what the ballot titles are and what the outcomes are. This is something I've supported. I supported it 2 years ago. It didn't make the ballot before. It's going to make it this year. It actually reverses half of the impacts of Prop 47 on property crimes, which if you have serial offenders, it holds them accountable, allows us to book them into jail and potentially arrest them and make them do that. The other thing it does is it reverses or clarifies what a violent crime is in the penal code, which was defined previously under Prop 47. The definition was there, but Prop 57 rather, talks about if you it was aimed at releasing people on early release from state prison if they have not committed a violent crime. Well, if you look at the definition of violent crime, it's very narrowly defined in the penal code. So things like rape of an unconscious person is not a violent crime by definition. Assault and battering a police officer is not a violent crime by definition that results in injury. So it includes a lot of the language that will prevent people from being released. It also corrects the property crimes portion of Prop 47 to hold people accountable for the crime wave that we are expecting. Talk about crime being down, but that's reported crime. There's a lot of commercial businesses that are so negatively impacted by property crime now that they're just not reporting it anymore. So it's given this false positive that crime is down when probably I've predicted if all crime was being reported, it's probably not down at all. That's not residential crime. In your areas, you're predominantly residential. So your crimes are probably realistically down, but other areas are not. Keeping California Safe Act, I'm behind it. The Board of Supervisors took up an initiative that we brought forward to support it as well. So if you see that on the ballot, please consider supporting that because it will reverse some of the negative consequences of Prop 47 and Prop 57.
So I'd like to make a comment on the zip code and name of our community. About a dozen years ago, FCA got the post office to allow North Tustin to be an allowable name for all of our communities, so we are all free to use that. Going forward, there's two things we'd like to do. To reverse North Tustin and Santa Ana and make North Tustin the default name and Santa Ana an allowable name. And then we also want to have another run at getting our own zip code, which we did have until 1996. Now, before we break, and we can do the tabletop discussions for a few minutes before you leave, East Orange County Water District did a raffle, and they'd like to report the winners.
Thank you, Rick. So I'm going to just read out the names, and if you could just stop by and see us before you go. Tony Vuong, Hal Marshall, Mike Concani, Chris Kramer, Richard Frankenstein, Alice McWilliams, Colleen Monaghan, Steve Cuniff. Thank you.
So that concludes the Q&A session. You're free to talk to county representatives at the back of the room, and hope to see you next year.